Created live on Fireside.
Welcome, I'm Lori Lee Binstock, and this is a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. Thank you so much for joining me live on Fireside Chat, where you can be a part of the conversation as my virtual audience. I am your host, Lori Lee Binstock. And on this show, everyone has an opportunity to ask questions of me or my guests by requesting to hop on stage or just sending a message in the chat box. Today's guest is Kimberly Bell. Kimberly is a minister and author of the memoir, The Epitome of Kimmy. Kimberly, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me, Lori. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. So, you have been through so much. You, at just such a young age, you experienced domestic violence, and obviously that kind of led to so many other traumas in your life. Can you go ahead and talk about your story a little bit?
Yeah, well, it's you just jogged a memory when you said so much in my life, and the domestic violence. Immediately I went back to what I actually my foundation of seeing from small, which was a physical altercation between my father and my mother. And the last traumatic experience was he had my sister and I in the car with him. And my mother was in the front seat, and we rode around until, obviously, I believe that he was trying to get us to be watched. But anyway, his fist and his hands landed on her face everywhere, and just blood. I just remember blood just, going down her face, and her crying and yelling, and him yelling, and just that traumatic physical altercation that I witnessed, that I seen. I found myself into situations like that once I got older. I'm just like, oh my gracious, but it was so traumatizing back then to see, and then to be so confused about, is this love or is this not? How can someone behave this way or react this way and have someone that you love? I'm looking at my birth mom that I love so much, be in pain and crying and hurt, and I'm helpless. I could not help her. And so, I found myself going in this journey of my life thus far and seeing repeated cycles and feeling the same helpless situation of me in, until I had to choose better,
Yeah, that's typically a hard choice, even though it seems from an outsider to make a change. It's like, why wouldn't you make a change? But that can be a really difficult thing to get out of, just mentally. I see that Kevin is actually wanting to make a comment. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Kevin, thank you so much. He just wanted to thank us for doing this. I really appreciate that. And please feel free to speak up or say anything if you'd like to. Well, Kimberly, so, and that kind of leads me to my question, how do you get out of that situation that you've experienced, just traumatic trauma, and just how do you move through that?
It's a process. I can tell you that. And I found that I had to get to a place individually in myself to want it for me. Not for my kids, but want it for me. Want a life differently. A life that I was seeing myself just living and not thriving, living into depression, anxiety, impulsiveness, and using the coping skills that was not working because we all have different coping skills and different styles that we have to do, to make ourselves feel better or to live a progressive life. And some of the coping skills I had to take a hard look at and say, even though I thought it was working, it was not working physically. It was affecting my body. I went into a work mode where I tried to work myself to death, try to numb my pain. I went through an episode in my life, the depression, where I just wanted to come home and sleep. If I wasn't taking care of my children as far as the physical concept of the mother role, then I would sleep. If I sleep it away, maybe I could sleep the pain away, Yeah. And it was never, thank God, drugs or alcohol, but I do remember also feeling this coping techniques with men, with other people, that I was trying to immediately get validation or acceptance, and then saying, okay, so then you accept me. Obviously, you need to be in my life. Whether you bring disrespectfulness or physical or mental or emotional abuse, just as long as you're in my life. I just don't want to feel the alone. I don't want to feel the abandonment. I don't want to feel that I'm not worthy to be with. So I had to really choose to really take a hard look at myself and accept first the broken foundation and why I was thinking this way, why I had these repeated cycles, and that was I ready to just finally choose me, learn to live for me, learn to love me with all the flaws and how I was created, and take this and listen at this. When I had to start to really find and learn how to love me, I had to go back and to accept just the type of person I am, because our characteristics, our personalities are different. And I'm like, as I explored my memoir and started really investing in me, I'm a genuine, kind person. This is just part of me. I'm a very peaceful, passionate person. And everybody's not for everyone, but I had to accept just how I'm created. I'm a very loving, I'm very kind. I can be crazy, but at that same time, I had to take the time and stop looking for validations, or stop yearning and grasping for someone to love or accept that kind person or that loving person, because I had to learn to accept it myself. Mm-hmm. Which I had never took the time to do until I got, like you said, I had to go through these processes and unhealthy relationships and lifestyles with even family members. It wasn't just so much of partners, different sex partners, but even family members, even down to my children, relationship to my children. I had to really accept and take a process of me. Invest in me. And once I gave myself that biggest gift and starting to love me for me, I started really changing my whole life as far as choosing my different coping skills, building my support system, strengthening my support system, because I've always had a relationship with God, but I had to choose as I was changing, my lifestyle and giving me this biggest gift, and that was invested in me, is strengthen that relationship my way. I have a amazing Amazon playlist because I love all types of music. So I even have different podcast segments of just inspirational quotes and inspirational talks that will come in after maybe an R&B song. But it's for me. It works for me. I do my nature walks. And when I do my nature walks, I cut just all my music, and then I just talk, just like I'm talking to you. I just talk to God, and I just let him know, give the gratefulness of my life, and then my worries and my stresses and my current concerns. I just start talking. And if I don't get that nature walk in, I've learned to get it in after I've taken my daughter to school on my way back home, because this is what worked for me. I have to continue to build what I want. And from what I found out is building and investing in time and what I want, which is a stronger relationship with him, because I'm going to need it with going back on the dating scene, challenges and struggles and obstacles that we all face in this earthly life. Changes just happens. And I remember making a quote on that. Changes do happen, and we have to learn to adjust with it. We will have to learn to go with the changes in our life. So it's just definitely been a process, but it's also been a blessing and as such a rewarding journey that I am so blessed that I'm able to inspire the good and the bad, and to be so transparent as much as I can on just to be able to help someone else.
Amazing. And I wanted to ask, how long did it take you to be able to get to a point where when you decided I needed to make changes? Because for most people, it could take 20, 30, 40 years to do this.
You're absolutely right. It really took last year. I was in my 40s, and not saying that I can tell you going through some of the processes confirm the change needed to be made, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But to really be as determined and hard, like I remember saying, and I also just randomly, I'll speak it out loud because I'm mindful what I speak out in the atmosphere. I would say, I fight hard for peace, and I fight hard to keep it. Mm-hmm. So such situations in my 40s had happened that just confirmed and prepared me to really get to this point in last year. And my book was released, and now saying that even helped, even with, because once that book got released and I was able to live what I put down on paper and was able to accept and embrace, this is my life. This is my truth. This is what happened to me. I have really accepted and embraced broken foundations, generational curses that I had at 15 built in my mind when I had my first child to stop, to go against religious taboo. I was able to accept and embrace that I was the one that's taking a stand that said, yes, I'm still going to have one of the best relationships between me and God, and who I know that loves me and who I was raised to learn about and to trust. But also, I am going to have a mental therapist in my life that is built also in my support system to go through this earthly life. I need it, and I'm going to have it. You know what I mean? So I'm just like, I'm so proud of that courageousness of being able to explain to you that the processes and the different processes of that has happened to me may be happening to someone else, as far as writing in their journal, or even taking that one step to go to a mental therapist. And then that is a step towards changing their life,
Absolutely. And I really loved when you were talking about making that change to kind of shift your mindset and get the help, and you decided, I'm going to take care of me. I think for a lot of us, especially, in the 90s, no, if you thought like, oh, I'm just going to take care of me, that was kind of considered selfish. It was very much like an environment where, oh, you live for other people, you do things for other people.
Yes.
But that just takes so much away from you.
Yes.
Yourself. Like there's not enough to give other people if you don't focus on yourself. And I think this is where that whole mindset needs to change. Self-care is not selfish. You can't pour from an empty cup. There's a reason why people say on the airplanes, put your face mask on first, put your oxygen mask first, because if you're putting someone else's oxygen mask on and they can't do it themselves, and then you pass out, no one's getting help. So, this really applies to everyone. self-care is extremely important, and I love that you said that. And I love that you said when you started focusing on you, you realized that there was this change, because people, that energy that you're giving out when
Mhm,
you're sad and depressed,
mhm.
when you're not taking care of yourself, people can feel that energy and it's draining.
Right.
But when you feel re-energized and you feel that you're whole, people can feel that too. That's just as contagious. And I
It
think
is.
that is so
It
much more
is.
powerful
It
to be
is.
able to do that.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And like you said, I know for me in the generational era that I was in was, especially when I had my first child, was now you have a child, if you have even more, you take care of your child. Your child is your life. And so I remember staying in situations for years for my children. But as you said, once I got it, now I'm incorporating to my adult children, and I have four of them, and I have my many, but I have four adult children, and the three girls especially. I said, take care of you.
Mm-hmm.
Take care of you. How are you feeling? What are you doing about you?
Right.
So I'm breaking that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's breaking generational
Yes,
cycles. It's
yes, yes.
so at the age of 15,
Yes, ma'am.
you became pregnant.
Yeah.
How was that for you?
Woo!
Well, before you, as a child, and a child who who felt abandoned, who was dealing with so much. How was that?
It was just like um a a fog. You know how you go, I can better explain it like if you would, you know how a fog comes and out of nowhere you're going through a fog, and before you know it you're through it.
Yeah.
That's what it seemed. I'm serious. This is how it seemed, Lori, of my pregnancy, because mind you, mentally, I was going through so much. At 12 or 13, I had already endured something that was so confusing to me with my extended family member, which was introduced to me as my uncle, with sexual molestation. And so that happened almost a year underneath my adopted parents' home. So, and I'm so confused because continued to say that he loved me. I was his Kim. He loved me. He loved me. And then I was confused with the church background because my parents trusted him all because he had gave his life to Christ, and he was saying that he was in church. But at the same time, this stuff was happening to me at night, while they were in bed. So moving on from that, that was like my first sexual intimacy experience with my body changing. That the first time that I actually had sex was I got pregnant.
Mm.
And I remember actually having that first time experience of having sex too. I might as well. It wasn't that like I really wanted to. It was like I
Right.
might as well do it because this is, hey,
Mm-hmm.
So when that happened, and then mentally being with a generational era, my adopted parents were much older, and they were really heavy in church, where she was very clear about, she did not care. She even said, I don't care if you were 12 or 13. We do not believe in abortions. I don't want to hear it. You got yourself into this, and now you are a woman. And so, Lori, I'm hearing this as this little Frank. I used to run cross country. I think they call it different now, but yeah, back then I couldn't run, short distance, but I was, then, and, petite, and this whole changing body experiences. And but mentally I'm hearing these words in the back of my head as my body is changing, and this baby is forming inside of me, is that I'm a woman now. What do I do? How do I fit the role, fill the shoes of this woman that she's talking about, that I'm a woman? I gotta do it. If anything that I gotta do, I got to do that. So mentally I was shot. And as I said, it was like going through a fog. And the day that as I was giving you that visualization, going clear from the fog, is when I had her on my due date, and I was so mentally and emotionally shocked. I couldn't even cry. I remember the doctor, and I still remember his name as today. He said to me, Kim, and because I guess he could see my expression. I was the youngest one in the whole hospital in our hometown. He said, Kim, you can cry. So when he laid her in my arms and he said that, it was like he had to give me permission. And I just bawled.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. The person who fathered your first child,
Mm-hmm.
what happened to him?
He was in my life. He was in my life for about 2 years. And he was the first one that introduced me pretty much with the physical altercation. We had got into it, as couples did. He was older. And of course, after I got pregnant and I had my child by him, my parents, accepted him because, of course, I'm in that role of I got to do now what a woman would do. So they didn't mind him coming over. They didn't mind, So I remember one of the arguments that we had, and I remember the first slap. And I was scared to really tell my mom about it. And it was like deja vu. It was like, I remember this type of treatment from my dad. So maybe it's okay.
Mm.
He says he loves me, maybe it's okay. So yeah.
Wow. But how did you feel about it? How did you feel that you had this person in your life? Did you want him in your life?
Yeah. And it was because of, I was still struggling with the rejection and abandonment.
Mm. And you said you were with him for about 2 years.
I had 2 children by him. I was with him for, The other second child came in just before I turned, they're almost 2 years apart and 10 days. And I remember just like that was yesterday. I'm very transparent about my story. I was just careless. I really didn't care. I gave up. I gave up by the time, I really gave up on myself by the time she was born, because I figured I had failed. I had failed my parents by getting pregnant the first time. Now that I'm a woman, I remember coming home from school, and and that's why one of the chapters says a silent cry, because even in that generation, a child, even though they said that I'm a woman now, I still was looked at as a child. You don't say but so much. And what goes on at home stays in the home, but you don't tell how you feel. You're too grown if you say that you're, and Lord, don't go around saying you're mad, and you're a child and staying underneath grown people's that's feeding you. You're gonna be slapped or kicked out, But so I didn't share. I was going through so much, and here my older sister's not there. All of us are still in a hometown. But my birth mother, I don't have any connection or communication with her. So going back to school after having a child in the 70s, that wasn't heard of. That wasn't typical. So I'm getting looks. I lose friends. It's just a mental state. I'm worn down. I'm feeling even more unworthy. So I remember coming home, and I just said to my mother, my adopted mom, I said, I decided I'm going to quit school. I'm going to go to get a job. And her answer was, her response was, okay. Okay. So in 11th grade, I quit. And I'm still dealing with, the first, their father. And this is when it got more careless. I just didn't care. And so I'm having unprotected sex by him, and I got pregnant again. And we had 2 children together. And then after, when she came, the physical altercations got worse, because he had another friend. He was, cheating and going out and whatever. And I was still trying to hold on, not wanting to be abandoned, don't want to be rejected, thinking that this man's going to have to be in my life now forever. And the fights was definitely getting worse. I remember one time we were at his cousin's house, and he threw a batch of keys right in my face just before I started working, all because he was upset with the fact that we got in an argument, and I said, I got to go to my job. I just got this new job and never had a problem getting a job, even with quitting school. But yeah, he was, threw a whole batch of keys in my face. And mind you, with us being at his cousin's house, we couldn't stay there. But it was the violence got worse. And so by the time I got pregnant with her, I said, this is it. And then I really had to, a light bulb came out and said, this is just not worth it. I think his other friend was getting involved, another female, and she wanted to fight me and everything. I said, no, this is just not worth it. So we broke up, but it just seemed those repeated unhealthy cycles and me allowing those things to happen kept repeating itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it is interesting that you say like you were careless, and I don't want to say like, oh, you were just like, oh, I don't care what happens to me, but I think it's safe to say that people who experience trauma, experience continuous trauma, because the trauma leads to other maladaptive coping skills. And for you, because if you were to care so much, it might be it would have been too much. You couldn't do anything about your situation at that point, at least with the resources you had, right? So and I make this point whenever I talk to anybody who talks about like, oh, I was sexually molested and then I became promiscuous and then I got into drugs and alcohol. These are textbook symptoms of PTSD.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's unfair for anyone to say you're a bad person because you're a careless person. You just did all these terrible things. These are symptoms of PTSD, and I feel like we should not put any fault on anyone. And honestly, when I remember going into treatment and saying, I was promiscuous. People called me a slut, and I was like, yeah, you're probably right. And it was really because, and my therapist looked at me and was just like, no, she's like, I don't like that. I don't like you using the words promiscuous or calling yourself any derogatory name, because you didn't do this just to be, just because you did this because you needed to cope in some way. You needed to find love in some way. You needed to feel love. You needed to feel validated, because everyone needs that. And when you don't get that as a child, you seek it in other places. And it does not mean that you're a bad person or whatever. But I appreciate you being transparent with that, because I feel like that's what happens to so many people. And thank you so much for your transparency. I wanted to ask, why did you decide to write your book?
I'm just now turning around in my office. I'm looking at this bucket list, and amazingly, I had 7 things that I put on the bucket list, and the fourth one says, "Have my memoir completed by the end of 2017." So I'm gonna take you back from 2017, being in the ministry, and the way my life journey started panning out as I quit in 11th grade, as I talked about, and then I went back to school, and I enrolled in a program here in our hometown that was the first new program. It called an external high school diploma, where they had candidates that you enroll and you get the same high school, diploma as if you went to your high school. And I went and I struggled because I had to have a teacher that got hard on me. But anyway, make a long story short, I ended up to be one of the chosens out of the 5 to be able to speak about my, enrollment, and how, as a mother of 4 children, was able to, complete and, share, be able to inspire other people. So as I'm going through these journeys, periodically during my occupations and working, I would be able to, share when it's appropriate, things about my life and saying, okay, I quit school, or I remember getting this job, or, you got to be persistent, or sometimes you just have to be determined. And, a lot of no's just doesn't mean, you're going to get that yes. Believe me, I've got a lot of no's. And far as educational barriers and intellectual barriers, I would be at the time that it would be appropriate to say, yes, I work extra hard. I struggle. Even when it comes to someone saying a test, I get anxious. But it will not stop me. It did not stop me from getting a degree. So as I'm sharing that with you, when COVID came, I remember it just sat me down, and I started thinking about my life, and started thinking about how many people had said, oh my gracious, you have a story to tell. Like, your life is like a movie. And how it helped periodically certain people from youth to young adults, me sharing bits and pieces of my story, to it just was like, I'm talking to you, something said now or never. You need to put all your story, everything that you went in as far as your journey, on paper. And I'm going to reveal, and now I know nothing but God. I'm going to reveal some things to you, and you're going to be set free. I felt like I was in a bondage. I felt like I wasn't in the bondage because I never really accepted and embraced my journey. I really never was sat down and accepted and embraced broken foundations that I can choose, and I have the right to build as God has created it for me to be. The sensuality, the intimacy, the healthy, the well mom, the well friend,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you, when you talk about your your recovery, and you talk a lot about, your parents being super religious, how did that lead you down this path of ministry?
Um, well, it seemed like I had a spiritual connection even from I was small. I wrote it in my book, when I was diagnosed for mild retardation, but I really should have been diagnosed with PTSD. And
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't remember. I was in resource for this my whole elementary school year, so to sixth grade. And if you got me to a number, let's say 20 or 25, the next day I couldn't remember. I couldn't get back to 25. I might get back to 17, but it was just a memory loss. I couldn't retain. I could just not retain information. So I had to repeatedly go over a book over and over and over to grasp those which the skilled words,
Mm-hmm.
those the sight words that the children have to learn now. Then my 6-year-old got on. I'm looking at her little skilled words now. So I had to, work on that for 6 years. But I remember they said on paper that I would never read or write effectively. And I would be a statistic that, it was mild retardation, that I would, just would not definitely be a college graduate. So I remember in 6th grade, and that was like my second prayer to God. And that was that I just didn't want to be different. And it was just a childlike prayer. So I knew I always had the spiritual connection. The first one was that night that I stayed in my adopted parents' house when my dad dropped me off from that traumatic fight that me and my sister witnessed. And he said to me he would be back. And it seemed like they already had a room prepared for me. And I was scared to tell them not to cut off the light, but they did leave the door open. I was scared to tell them not to cut off the light. And I just remember vividly crying, wondering if my dad was going to come back the next day and what was my sister doing. But I also was crying in a spiritual connection, saying that if I get up tomorrow and I'm still here, I'm going to be all right. I didn't know how, but I was going to be okay. So I had this spiritual connection, and what my adopted dad did, I give him so much, honor, because he cultivated it. He instilled the scriptures. He would just not let me believe that this world that we're created in, that God had allowed me to be there and underneath their roof, that it wasn't love. And there was a love different from him, which was God's love. So that, in a sense, took me into the ministry whole. And I say, and now I say, I minister almost every day, because I found that doing the denomination and so many religious leaders, or so many people that talks about, spirituality and stuff like that, pinpoints the pulpit, which is fine if that's what they believe as far as themselves. But I found that you don't have to be just a minister in a pulpit. You can minister. So yeah, so that's how it took me there. But I remember he putting his foot down immediately. And both of my parents were very religious in church, but my mother would get very emotional about things, and she would say, I don't understand why you would want to go with someone that don't want you. When I would, get into my anxious mode, and I would go to one episode and I start crying. I was 8 or 9 years old, and start saying, I want to go to my mom. Now I knew she wasn't connecting with me, but I always initiated wanting to connect with her. She and my biological parent father was all I knew. And I said, I want to go, I want to see my sister. I want to go with my mom. I want to live with my mom. And she would get in her feelings and her emotions, because, she's doing everything that she can do for me as a mom. I'm looking at her in her view, and she says, I don't understand why you want to go with someone that doesn't want you, that treated you bad, and da da da. And he would stop her, or he would just be like, we're not going to do this. We are not going to do this. We're going to teach her love. It's okay that she wants to be with her. It's okay that she wants to see her siblings. Yeah. So he kept that foundation, that spiritual foundation. He cultivated it for me to be, where I am now. And I love to inspire now, and it's in a different way than what even I was underneath, was an elder. And I even had at my church at one time, to be able to say to people, you find your relationship. It may not look like mine, but as long as you have a relationship with a spiritual being, or, that's how I have to put my support system in play.
Wow, that's amazing that you actually had this person guiding you, because I think that's another thing. People who are able to thrive, there's at least one person in their life who says, this is right. This is, you should feel loved. You should feel validated. And I think, I mean, I think it's amazing. What do those people say who diagnosed you mildly retarded? Like, you are now an author of a book. How does that make you feel?
I know. It's amazing to me still. It's amazing to me still, and just makes me feel so good that I had this resilience, and I was just determined that, you know, and you're right, about people. And I remember my godmom, as you were saying that, I remember my godmom, she was the very first one that said, and she has a country country accent because she's from Huntsville, Alabama. She says, honey, you so smart, you so beautiful. And I just melted. And I was like in my late 30s, but that was the first time I ever heard someone say that to me.
Oh my gosh, in your late 30s.
Yeah.
Mm. That is really hard. And I think that, and I love that you did mention, like, it should have been diagnosed PTSD. I didn't even know that PTSD affected anyone but veterans up until a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I struggled with a lot of behavioral issues, a lot of when it came to education. I was not I didn't do well in school. I was diagnosed ADHD, which is also a sign of PTSD. There's so many things, so many symptoms of PTSD that can be diagnosed in other things. I was also diagnosed bipolar, which after going into treatment, they're like, no, you are definitely not bipolar. You have PTSD. And it was like a light bulb went off, like, oh my gosh. I had no idea. And it really did help knowing that what I had gone through, because I'm a childhood sexual abuse survivor, which, like I said, led to other traumas, put me in really traumatic situations. I'm just trying to cope, all these maladaptive coping skills. But it was interesting because, up until a few years ago, I thought I just suppressed, the abuse. And so it has no effect on me. That's what I kind of told myself. I just don't want to think about it. And honestly, this is what my mom would say: if you don't think about it, it didn't happen. But that is not true. And it did affect me, and it really affected what I thought was my personality, which is not. And I think we need to start asking ourselves, well, if we're struggling with something, what is it? What happened to me? Instead of like, what's wrong with you?
Right.
But I do want to ask, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, not really. You're absolutely right about the misdiagnosed, and I'm just, it's the 70s, and I'm so glad that now they're doing better testing, and they're, I know it's a lot of other diagnoses and descriptions of different, mental illness, but at least we're getting somewhere to the fact that, it is there, it is out there, and it can be treated. And I still, I went through, just not too long ago, my adopted mother passed away, so I had reached out because I've been so busy with my work and everything, and since that had happened, and which is another disruption in my life, and I had to deal with some things that has been painful, has been hurtful, because of I spoke my truth, and my book is out. My, certain family members are, upset with me, don't want, and so I I reached out to her, and I started having my sessions again, because I know that that's what works for me and that's what's needed. And she knew because she didn't even know about what had happened recently, but I told her, before I set up the schedule, she said, well, can you wait until, are you good? What's happened? And I told her, I said, I already know, the book is out and everything. I said, but my mother that raised me just passed away. And she said, okay, Kim, okay. All right, let me look at my schedule. And because they know, like you said, there's a change that's happening in your life, unexpected or expectedly, and we have to be able to cope with it the best way we can. And so I make the choice to cope with it the best way I can, to not regress, but to be better, to come out of this better, not bitter, but better.
I love that. Thank you so much, Kimberly. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really, really enjoyed speaking with you, and I'm so grateful that you're sharing your story.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate your platform. Thank you so much, Lori.
Thank you. Well, that was Kimberly Bell, minister and author of The Epitome of Kimmy. To learn more about Kimberly, you can go ahead and click on that fortune cookie right there on your screen, and that will go ahead and send you straight to her website. Or you could just head over to tstpodcast.com. That's the letter A, tstpodcast.com. Kimberly has also contributed to March's issue of Authentic Insider, which you can also find at my website at tstpodcast.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my email list to get Authentic Insider SelfCare magazine in your inbox monthly. Join me next week on Fireside Chat when author, podcaster, and achievement coach Karen Millen and I discuss creating a beautiful divorce. You've been listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Fireside. I'm Lori Lee Binstock. Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. Take care.